Just to check, how many of you actually have heard of ICO or cryptocurrency Crowdsale these days? Raise your hand. So it's actually not too bad. It's actually pretty good. So my name is Alan. I will be the moderator here today. I'm the venture partner of Sparkland Capital. We look at disrupting companies in general. I'm really happy that we have both of these guests here today to talk about, what is happening with the space. And, I will start with, Joey is actually one of the most respected person in this industry. He was one of the first ones to ever do an ICO. And also he's leading a new fund. He just joined actually as a co-chief investment as a Pantera. It's a 100 million fund focusing on investing cryptocurrencies. And this is your very first public appearance as well. And I think, Gil, you have invested in PayPal back when PayPal wasn't called PayPal, and it was actually one of the top AngelList syndicate investor. And this is also your first kind of public event talking about, I guess, ICOs in general. So very happy. But maybe we can start with maybe Joey. You can have a quick intro about yourself, and then we can start from there.
Yeah. So. My name's Joey Krug. I heard about this thing called Bitcoin in 2011, and it's supposedly a way to earn money with your computer. Thought that seemed way too good to be true. And 6 weeks later, it was still the top post on this forum I used to visit. And so I started mining some Bitcoin, read the white paper, and thought that it was really interesting because it was basically the first time that someone had made a different currency that wasn't really controlled by government. It was actually decentralized and had no central bank behind it. And fast forward a few years later, 2014, I was kind of playing around with the idea of people paying with Bitcoin in stores at the point of sale. And then I came upon this realization that was kind of a stupid idea because people don't want to pay in Bitcoin. They have credit cards. They work pretty fine. But a good use for this tech is stuff that purely exists on the blockchain. So I thought, okay, well, what can I do that's purely on the blockchain itself? And I came up with this idea that while Bitcoin gave us decentralized money, we don't really have a decentralized financial system. And so I created Augur, which is a project to basically create a platform where you can create financial derivatives on essentially anything. And it's built on top of Ethereum. So I started that in 2014. 2015, we did a crowd sale. Back then, ICOs were not a term. It was called crowd sales back then. And we raised $5.3 million. And then launched an alpha in 2015, launched a beta last year, and this year the idea is to launch it with real money on Ethereum. And then just recently, a couple months ago, I joined Pantera to help them launch a new ICO fund. So the idea is it's a hedge fund, and it only invests in ICOs, typically before they're public.
So Gil, maybe a quick introduction as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gil Penchina. As mentioned, I was one of the first investors in what at the time was called Confinity, a cyber currency to allow you to move money from your Palm Pilot to a Pepsi machine back in '98, and that eventually became PayPal, and have invested in a number of other sort of payments businesses since then, including Indiegogo and AngelList, and within the crypto world, I'm an investor in Brave and Ripple and Blockstream and several others. My day job has always been running companies, and so I've been an entrepreneur who was early at eBay, helped start several companies, and now I'm sort of pivoting back to doing a little more investing. But given all the excitement around blockchain, I'll probably be launching some sort of incubator soon to help friends of mine who are all busy coming up with the next great blockchain idea.
So cool. Maybe we can start with Gil. I think, just kind of curious, how do you actually start out as a angel investor in the first place? And I think also, how do you came across the AngelList platform? What was different about AngelList at the time?
Sure. So if you talk to most angel investors, they will tell you why they do these things, and almost never is make money top of the list. It's usually, I want to give back to the community, I want to learn things, I'd like to eventually be one of these fancy pants VCs, I want to network, I want to get invited to cool parties, I want to be a board member someday, and in my case, I was interviewed at Stanford back in '98 when I first started, and I said, my plan is to lose all my money. And they're like, that's a dumb plan. And I'm like, yeah, but think about it, right? I'm a new angel investor. The good companies are going to go to Sequoia and Kleiner and all those people. And so I'm going to see bad ideas, and I'm going to take those bad ideas, and I'm going to apply bad judgment. And that's going to end pretty badly. And if you look at my first 5 years as an angel investor, it was one deal out of 25 that was the only reason I didn't lose money, and that was PayPal. I got lucky. And the next 25 looked better, and the next 25 looked better. And like anything in life, it takes 10,000 hours to get good at it. So I just basically did it because I decided it was worth doing.
Cool. And, because of that wise, you seem to witness witness trends before actually it was a trend, I think. And is that the right way to say it, or?
No, I mean, there have been angel investors since the 60s. I talked to some very old lady who told me that early semiconductor companies here in the 60s would go to bridge club meetings to try to raise money from ladies who played bridge.
Okay. Well, that was interesting. Joey, will you mind actually share your story of how you actually started with Augur? What made you want to start this in the first place, in a sense?
Yeah, so when I started Augur, I was in school at the time, studying computer science, and basically I thought that, like the internet did for information, I thought blockchain was going to do for money and finance. And so I thought that if I stayed in school and, waited 4 years to start working on something in this space, that a lot of the good low-hanging fruit ground opportunities would already be taken. And so, I was working on the point of sale thing, shelved it, dropped out and started Augur to basically actually build this decentralized financial system.
So you seem to get a lot of attention from the top cryptocurrency people, including from Vitalik, from guys from Coinbase. What was your experience with them, I guess, and how do you came to where you are?
Yeah, so I mean, when I initially started Augur, we were building on Bitcoin. So the wisdom at the time was, well, anything interesting should be built on Bitcoin. So we took Bitcoin and started modifying it to try to make it work. And it was just a nightmare. We spent about a month on it, and I'd heard of this project called Ethereum relatively briefly. This guy named Vitalik, who started Ethereum, kept saying, you should really build on Ethereum, it's way better. And so one weekend I was kind of frustrated, and I just said, okay, I'm going to try to build what I built on Bitcoin, but do it on Ethereum. One day, I was able to do what took me a whole month on Bitcoin. And so I said, okay, this Vitalik guy actually has something here. And so I just started communicating with him, and he added a lot of features to the language we were using, which was called Serpent, because we needed them to build Augur. And he even made some small changes to Ethereum that made it possible to build what we're actually building.
Cool. So I think since this topic is about ICO, I'm sure maybe not everyone knows about the term. So I think maybe Gil, you can. I think you have a good maybe a quick introduction about what you think. What is ICO?
I think he actually has more history on it, and I can sort of put it in business terms. Do you want to tell the history story of how it used to be called and all that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give the history. So, back in very late 2013, Vitalik Buterin came up with this idea for Ethereum. It was basically take Bitcoin and make it so you can programmatically do stuff with the money. And basically what ended up happening is he's like, okay, well, how am I going to raise money for this? And it required this token called Ether to pay for computations on the network. And so it wouldn't make sense to sell that to VCs, because if you sold the whole thing to VCs would control the whole network, which would mean it's no longer a decentralized network. It's just controlled by a handful of VC funds.
And actually, at that point, no VC fund could invest in token.
Yeah, that's another good point. And so in 2014, in August, they did a crowdfunding campaign. They basically said, send us Bitcoin, and you'll get some Ether in exchange for it, and we're going to build this platform. And so they raised around $20 million, and built the platform over the course of the next year. And launched it in 2015. And in 2015, there were a couple projects that did these pretty small things, a few $1 million, called Crowdsales. And the idea was you created some token, and it was usually, a very integral part of the network, and people would auction these off. And so Augur was actually the first crowd sale that was done on Ethereum. And then nowadays, that term has switched to be called ICOs.
Which I think we can thank Brock Pierce for, most likely. He seems to have been the most vocal on that one. So an ICO actually is more like a Kickstarter campaign or a crowd sale than it is like an IPO, if you think about it, right? A company puts up a web page and says, send us Ethereum, or now send us Ethereum and Bitcoin, and we'll send you back our tokens. And it's really that simple. It's starting to look like an IPO in the background in that now you're seeing bankers getting involved, doing road shows and calling people like Pantera and saying, do you guys want an allocation of this early before the public gets it? But fundamentally, it is just that. It's a Kickstarter campaign for a new project. And the people who are describing it more like an IPO, I think, are misleading us in some ways about that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And especially like the best way, if you're a project doing this sort of thing, is not to come to Pantera and say, hey, we have an allocation, we have all the money we need, we just want to give you an allocation because you're Pantera, and we know you invest in this stuff. The kind of stuff that we're actually looking for is projects like Augur, where we needed to get funding to get to the point where we were ready to do a crowd sale. And it's like one project we funded is called 0x, and that was a very good example of a project that really needed the funding to get to the point where they're going to do a crowd sale later in August. And that's the kind of stuff that actually excites me about the space, not the more IPO, pumpy kind of investment banking stuff.
So since we're in this topic-wise, I think there's a lot of buzz right now, and there's a lot of definitely hype, and maybe I think maybe Joey, you could. I think it's a little bit different when you were first started, in a sense. But I think that's also one of the reasons you want to join Pantera on funding companies that are more on the solid background, not just people who want to do a pump and dump, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, when we started, these things were pretty small. At the time, I think Augur was the third or fourth largest crowd sale, and that was 5.3 million. Today, 5.3 million is a small crowd sale that no one's heard of, and so that means the market's a lot more exuberant. One thing that's kind of interesting if you look at cryptocurrency and the way people think about investing is they don't think, oh, I'm going to invest $10,000 into this ICO. They think, I have 1,000 Ether, I'm going to invest 50 Ether into this ICO. So they think denominated in the token they're actually investing, which means that in practice these rounds become much, much larger, largely due to the fact that the price of Ether has shot up so much. But and so like anything else, 90% of it is not very useful. But the 10% that is actually useful, doing something interesting, adding value to the world, I think is definitely worth dealing with and sifting through the other 90%. It's the same thing you saw with the internet back in the 90s. 90% of it was useless, but the 10%, or even less than 10%, I would say, that actually has value is very, very cool.
So I think, Gil, you actually invest quite a few companies, such as Brave, Civic, where in the latest recent months, they actually started doing their own ICO as well. Can you share a little bit more about your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so you're starting to see that, right? Brave was probably one of the first examples of a company adding a coin rather than starting as a token project. Mm-hmm. And I think Brandon sort of had this marketing genius idea that his browser could benefit from a coin that would help pay publishers. The primary reason for that is, he went around to a bunch of venture funds and was pitching his idea of a browser that would block all your ads, and then let users sort of see a very limited selection of ads that Brave would show, and the VCs all said, "That's a terrible idea. You're going to get sued into oblivion." In fact, I even sat in one of those meetings. And he goes, okay, well, maybe if we can create a token and encourage the publishers to actually be shareholders in this enterprise as opposed to being people suing us, we can do something interesting. And ultimately, his idea is that consumers will get paid for their attention. You'll receive BAT for using the browser, and publishers will get paid in BAT for providing ad inventory, and there'll be a clean, simple, easy ad that gets inserted in the right place, much like you sort of have on Facebook today. And so if you think of Brandon's core vision, it's what if the entire internet looked like Facebook, where yes, there are ads, but they're kind of built in a way that isn't too annoying, it isn't too janky, and don't blink and pop up and do all the annoying auto audio that we see on the rest of the internet. What if the browser forced the entire internet to use a safe, simple, clean ad format? And that got a bunch of people excited. I think, at least from the investor notes I saw after the ICO, I think there were a couple of constituencies within the crypto community that were pretty excited. One was Brave blocks all cookies, so anyone who's a privacy nut is a big fan of supporting Brave. And the other one was Brave blocks janky ads, and there's a bunch of people who are in the crypto community who are also ad block community types, so they loved Brave. And the last is Brandon is just fundamentally an awesome technologist who builds great open source software that people actually use. And if you know anything about Mozilla, the Firefox browser company that he came from, he's built great products that hundreds of millions of people use, and now he's out doing it again.
So I think Brave and Civic is also Pantera's portfolio as well. So I think, but this is also the many cases where startups are starting to not go through VC, but they were starting to explore more on the ICO route. But at the same time, was because there's so many people trying to find an ICO strategy just to raise money. This is also another thing we're seeing, which is why we need kind of investors we have here today to maybe like either help guide towards the right direction or helping companies in general. But I think Joey, you also invest quite a few. I think both of you actually invest in a fund called Polychain. Can you guys share about your story with Polychain Capital in general, or Olaf and
Sure. So Polychain is it's another hedge fund that focuses on cryptocurrency. The difference between it and Pantera is it doesn't just buy ICOs; it buys other things that are publicly traded. And so about a year ago, I just met Olaf, who's the guy who started it, and said that I'd be happy to give him any advice about the space. And he ended up raising a small GP round, and I invested in it at the time because I thought it was a good idea, and I thought that since while I personally can go and buy these publicly traded cryptos pretty easily, the average investor cannot, and so people would probably be willing to pay for that, and I think that's been the case.
So I'm biased because in addition to being an LP, I own a small piece of the GP of Polychain, so I'm technically a part owner. But I think Olaf, who is one of the early Coinbase guys, is one of the smarter guys in the space and is, I would say, probably 70-80% focused on buying and holding ICOs, but also a bit opportunistic and will trade. So it is a little different from Pantera. There's probably 70% overlap, I would guess.
So I think this is also an example of a new ecosystem breed because of the ICO kind of trend happening right now. I think every single month there's something new. I think we see companies just getting more and more excited. But also also come back to Joey, you're saying that you want to support some companies in general. That isn't just doing a Crowdsale because it's an easy way to raise money. What are some other examples you think are good for the ecosystem in general?
Yeah, so some of my favorite ones are, one project I syndicated on AngelList. It was a regular equity round. It was called NewMirai, and so they have a token, but they didn't actually do a crowd sale. They have basically a hedge fund that's crowdsourcing people to submit predictions to it, where they think the price of a stock will go, and they're using machine learning to do it. And they had a problem which is kind of similar to the problem Augur faced, which is, well, how do you prevent someone from submitting a bad prediction? Because you don't know how it performed in the stock market until it's too late, and you have to trade about it ahead of time. And so what they came up with, and I kind of helped them with this, is this idea of, well, if you have them place a bond or you put up something of value, and if you lose it, and the reason you would lose it is if you're trying to cheat the system or overfitting, then you can't get any money from the system going forward. So that's a really cool project that's like, I helped advise and still do advise that needs a token but didn't necessarily do a crowd sale.
So it's not really a proof of stake, it's an escrow. And what happens when I sign up again under a new username every 3 seconds? How do you prevent sort of gaming of systems like that?
Yeah, so that's called a Sybil attack. And the way you prevent that is with tokens, ignoring someone who wrote the code very, very badly. With tokens, it doesn't matter if you have 10,000 accounts with one token or one account with 10,000 tokens. In any of these systems, it's functionally the same. So while you could make 100,000 accounts, you would have to get tokens in all of them, which the only way you can get is by performing well in the tournament.
So Gil, I think you have been advising Sarbs throughout different years. I feel like there's a lot more companies who raise a successful ICO, but they suddenly don't know how to use the money effectively. So, maybe they do. Maybe some will have more questions. So I assume that also need kind of either VC's guidance or investors, sometimes people who have been through the guidance in general. I see you've been kind of advising companies right now. What are, for example, what are some things that you've been kind of helping when it comes to people who had raised ICO?
So I'm not sure I go to VCs for advice about how to run a company. VCs tend to be more the bossy pants people trying to tell you how to run a company, even though they usually haven't. I think ultimately you're looking for people who've done similar problems to what you've done before, right? And so, like I was chatting with Catherine at Tezos recently and talking about just what it's like to go from 10 people to 50 and, what changes as you build a bigger organization. A lot of these companies are also highly distributed because people are all over the world. So you'd like to talk to people who've run distributed technical organizations because it's a lot harder when you can't grab everyone, throw them in a room, and start yelling at them. Which, my last company, Fastly, I remember we had some technical issues at one point, and my co-founder literally dragged the entire engineering team in the room, and we counted, we think every third word out of his mouth was fuck. And, he got everyone on the same page really fast. It's a lot harder to do when you have, a team all over the world in different time zones, all operating on IRC. And so those are examples of scaling and communicating and building and architecture decisions that just without a whiteboard, it's hard to do. And this town is full of great people who have built really awesome organizations. So, if I'm leading a crypto project, I start with Vitalik probably as sort of someone who's probably knows more about leading a decentralized blockchain project than anyone else, and folks like Joey and others. And then I look for people who've just done generally decentralized software. I mean, I think the Skype guys probably know more about this than a lot in some ways too.
So this is I think the business aspect is very important too. And I think, Joey, you're also bringing in the technical aspect as well because you were the lead developer at Augur. Maybe you can also share a bit more about what are some of the technical helps you kind of help the projects you've been helping with.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of the projects in this space, face a lot of game theory problems. It's like you have to think when you're doing a decentralized software project, you have to think, how is someone going to try to break this? How is someone going to try to attack it? And you need to make sure that the economics align and it makes sense. Basically, you want to be able to answer the question: if everyone is being purely as greedy as possible and trying to make as much money as possible, is this still secure? And then the other question you want to answer is: if someone's willing to spend money at this just to be a jerk, is it still secure against that? And how much money does it take to break the system if they're just a jerk willing to burn money? And so helping projects kind of address those two challenges is something that's really important for technical advisors. There's not it's not the same across any project. It's always different. NewMirai is probably closest to something similar to another project, which is Augur. You have the problem of people trying to cheat the system and making the economics align. But it really just depends on the project.
It's a great example, right? Like at PayPal, they thought they had fraud covered when they verified accounts, and then they found people would steal identities. And so they had to find other ways to verify accounts. And then they came up with a notion of transactional feedback. And after you'd done a certain number of good transactions, they stamped you as like a good guy. And so the criminals would learn that, and they would do 50 good transactions in a row, and then 500 really bad ones as fast as possible, which is a term now called breakout fraud, right? You sort of build up a good persona and then hammer the system. And so much like security generally, there's a cat and mouse game here, and it gets harder when you're running an open source project where you don't control the servers and you can't update the code. And so, I think to Joey's point, thinking through the architecture of security and game mechanics early is a really painfully important part of this.
Great. So we talk about ICO. We talk about what kind of help that ICO companies may need from experts, and just maybe from your point of view wise, what are some of the things that we should pay attention to in the upcoming month? I'm sure there'll be lots of up and downs, but maybe Joey, you've been through this. Maybe you could kind of tell us what do you think will happen upcomingly.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about markets like this is no one can predict exactly what's going to happen. So, as an investor, the way I approach it anyway is basically invest in the stuff that you think is going to be around 5 to 10 years from now. Don't get too close to the fire playing momentum plays, because the market can turn at you at any instant. But even if you bought Apple in 1999, you still made a very good investment as long as you held on to it. But if you bought pets.com, which wasn't as good compared to Apple, well, you basically lost your money. So that's how I would approach it. And then on the project side, there's lots of new stuff coming out that's very cool. Filecoin is one very cool project that's making basically a distributed file system. It's kind of like, you could think of it sort of like BitTorrent plus incentives, but it's a bit more advanced than that. And then also decentralized exchanges. Right now in cryptocurrency, there's billions of dollars stored on centralized exchanges. And in the long run, I don't think that needs to be the status quo. Yeah,
it's very true. I mean, there's actually probably more than about tens of billions now on some of these exchanges. There are a bunch of interesting projects that I agree with a couple points Joey made. The first is diversify, right? Even whether it's angel investing or ICO investing, there's a bunch of rules like you should have at least 30 different investments because 27 of them will go to zero. If you're lucky. If you're unlucky, all 30 will go to zero. So, diversification is definitely helpful. And then, funny enough, to your point on 95, I was getting interviewed by a reporter a couple days ago, and she was talking about the Brave ICO and how insane it is that someone would raise $35 million for a browser that had no money, and clearly that was a sign that things are completely fucked up in Silicon Valley. And I just sort of let her do her little rant. And at the end, I was like, have you heard of a company called Netscape? Because they went public in 95 with no revenue and a browser, and that worked out pretty good for, the people who were involved, and eventually became $1 billion company before Microsoft crushed it. And funny enough, little history thread, but Netscape, as it was dying, the source code got contributed to a foundation that built Mozilla, called Mozilla, that built Firefox, which is effectively the son of the Brave browser. And so there's like this arc of Netscape to Firefox to Brave. And so I was just sort of laughing and going, look, this is actually very normal. This is a new industry, and there's a new browser. Just like there was a new mobile browser, right? And Safari and Chrome are sort of winning the mobile browser war against everybody. This is the next industry shift. And in many ways, I think of this as we move from PC server to PC to client server to cloud, and there will be a decentralized cloud as sort of the next layer of infrastructure that, 5 years from now, there will be decentralized cloud architects in the same way that you see cloud architects popping up at all the big companies now.
So we talk about our thoughts maybe in the next few years, but as an entrepreneur, what should I do right now? Should I considering do an ICO or don't? What are some of the things that you guys would recommend?
I mean, so what I would say is you should really only do an ICO if it's like absolutely necessary to to create your project and to operate your project, because the stuff that's going to stay around in the long term isn't going to be the stuff where people decided I'm going to do an ICO because it's a nice market and it's cool and it's a good way to raise money. That stuff just isn't going to be there, years from now. When we did the Augur Crowdsale, it would have been much more convenient to raise money from VCs. You only needed a few $1 million, but then flip side is we had to sell it because we didn't want 5 people controlling our network. We instead got 3,000 in the beginning. Now it's 25,000. So basically, my thought would be, don't basically figure out what you want to build and then see what fundraising model works for it. Don't pick a fundraising model and then build something around that, because you'll end up probably doing it wrong.
Gil?
If you're an entrepreneur that codes and wants to learn about coding on the blockchain, call me.
All right, awesome. I think we're close to time. Does anyone have any questions in general? I think we got like 2 minutes or something. All right. Go ahead. Sorry. Can it be?
Needs a mic.
Yeah.
How can I or anybody who's interested in blockchain can contact you, because we cannot see your email ID or something? Yeah.
I have a really weird name, so I'm easy to reach on Facebook. There aren't many Gil Penchinas, so that's probably the easiest.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, okay. I have a question.
Go ahead.
I have a quick question. So, you guys addressed a lot of technology and funding. So, what about the regulatory scheme? I would like to hear some thoughts from both of you.
I think the two of us have spent 0 years in Washington collectively. What I would say is that the tokens seem to be an interesting regulatory area in that there isn't a lot of regulation. But if you look at a lot of like Filecoin as an example, it's very clear from a regulatory standpoint what a Filecoin is. It's a prepaid gift card for use to buy storage. So some of them are very clear. Ethereum and Bitcoin, it's not at all clear what they are. And so I would say the regulation, the great thing about this country is we let people do things. Lots of bad things happen. Some good things happen. And then the regulators can look at the bad things and come up with appropriate regulation. They often go too far because that's what you do when you get upset and you see lots of bad things. And then we elect Republicans and they bring them back. And, there's this ebb and flow of this sort of thing. So I would expect regulation to come, and I would expect it to be probably a little overreacting to begin with.
Hello, my name is Georgia. You mentioned that you have not made money for past 19 years. I think that you are not alone. In the United States, after Google, we only got one large public company, which is Facebook. I just wonder why the US VCs are not interested in making money, why they couldn't make money after Google at all. What happened?
There's only so many $500 billion companies you can create in the world. So I say, I think the fact that Facebook came after Google is pretty impressive. There have been an enormous number of $10 to $100 billion companies created by venture, whether it was LinkedIn or Snapchat or Twitter or, on the enterprise side, Workday and Salesforce. So I'm not at all worried about it, and I think there will be many more to come. There's enormous areas of investment right now that will be the next, billion and $10 billion companies. And in fact, if you look within crypto, how many of the crypto companies now have $1 billion plus valuation? Ripple does, Tezos in theory does, if it was a company. But at least in Ripple, we've got a 10 billion plus company already in the crypto space. Yeah, no 100 billions yet, but it's not that old a tech.
So what do you see the future world of decentralization look like in how many number of years?
Yeah, I think decentralization is going to take it's going to take a while. So I think over the next 3 to 4 years, we'll start seeing blockchain tech that actually scales pretty well. I think it's probably going to be another few years after that before we see people actually being very serious about UI, UX, and design, which is what you need to get people to actually use this. And then there's a final piece that may take 5 to 10 years to actually see something implemented very well, which is when you're using crypto for things like Augur, you don't want the volatility of Ether when you're making a trade. So you don't want to buy something on Augur, be right about your speculation, but lose 30% because Ether dropped 30% overnight. And so for that, we need stable cryptocurrencies, which are just very nascent and don't really exist yet.
All right, thank you, Joey. Thank you, Gil. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to follow up. And yeah, let's give them a round of applause.